Hello everyone. Welcome back to Aero League Racing Tier 1. My name is Aman and you all join me today for the Hungarian Grand Prix. We're all set to get underway here very shortly, as just a few more minutes now, and I think we're going to have close to a full lobby here, so just a little while longer now and we should be getting started very soon. So until then, be sure to get yourself comfortable, get yourself something to eat, maybe something to drink, grab a loved one, and we should be getting started very soon. Hello, Said. Good to see you as always. How have you been, man? I don't think I've gotten the chance to talk to you properly throughout this entire season. How's the season going for you? Right then, ladies and gentlemen, with only a few more minutes left to go until we get underway, let's talk about the track, shall we? So Hungary, a very tight and twisty section, a tight and twisty track. So high downforce is definitely going to be the priority here today. Your expected quick lap times should be in the upper echelons of the 115. So we'll have that to look out for. 35 laps around the circuit, and while we get the chance, why not look at the standings as I quickly take those out and the very last second look at them. So, at the current moment at time, where is tier 1? There it is. Right. So, at this current moment in time, Mitchell leads the championship with 74 points and currently sits P1. Joe Royal, not too far behind with 55 points, sits in P2. And then BR4 driving the Red Bull sits in P3 with 45 points. We have Elite in the Aston Martin with 39 points in P4, and his teammate Typos, who's also in the Aston Martin, of course, in P5 with 35 points. The rest of the top 10 would be Big Bambino in P6, Jaguar in P7, Stell in P8, Ella in P9, and Jacko in P10. Looking at the constructor standings, Ferrari lead the championship with 78 points, but are very closely followed behind by Aston Martin, who are in P2 with 74 points. We have Mercedes currently. We have Mercedes twice. I want to say. Hold on. I need to make sure. Wait a second. Hold on a second here. Right. Yeah, Mercedes is in P3 right now with 52 points, and then we have Red Bull in P4 with 49 points. And then we've completely missed out a team there. It's unfortunate, but regardless, we have gotten the go-ahead from Mitchell to get the Grand Prix underway. So just a little bit while longer now, and we should have everything started up very soon. Right then, let's get qualifying at the Hungarian Grand Prix underway as I quickly set up all the data. It seems like we have a few light clouds in the area which may signify some rain later on and during the race, but for now we seem to have a completely dry track out. So who will be the first driver to go out on track? Obviously, it being a high downforce setup, drivers would most likely be wanting to go near the end of the. There we'll be looking for drivers going absolutely to the absolute end of the qualifying session, as the most rubber is going to be set out on track and the most grip is going to be laid out. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have now gotten it underway. We can see there is some activity in the McLaren garage, as there's two McLarens actually coming out. That would be Jacko Lacko and Adam. Adam being the first car out on track, so we'll be riding on board with him to see how hopefully the first time lap around Hungary goes. Remember, the expected pole position time should be in the very high ups on the 115 scale, so we'll be looking at where drivers will be positioning themselves for that. Currently, it seems like Adam is going to be setting the first lap. We don't know if the McLarens will switch positions around, as both the orange cars sticking very close to each other through their out laps at the moment. I apologize for my throat as well, as it's a bit rough these days, so I need to keep clearing it. Regardless, coming to that fast left-hander, very easy to unsettle the car here, and the infamous long right-hander, where even if you slightly touch those curves, you'll most likely lose the car out. So drivers are going to have to be very careful that they position themselves very nicely through that corner so that they gain the most amount of time while making sure that they don't spin out. Coming towards the end of Sector 2. Sector 3, not really too overcomplicated. You have one giant U-turn. We have two giant U-turns essentially, and that's basically all Sector 3 really is. But still a very easy place to unsettle the car and lose out on a lot of time. And since lap times aren't really long around here, we may be looking at drivers going for consecutive runs. So regardless, we are riding on board with Adam as he begins the first time lap here at Hungary, coming across the line and beginning his timed run. DRS wide open, as the DRS begins actually before the start finish line, heading down into turn 1, brakes super hard and turning straight across the right across the curb there. You can see the sparks flying off the McLaren there as it signifies how much of a high downforce setup this track is, as the Red Bull gets out of the way for the McLaren driver. And luckily, it seems like Jacko's actually managed to create a bit of a gap between himself and his teammates as to not run into him or catch up to him too far ahead. Obviously setting a purple sector 1, but that is because he is the first driver out on track to actually set a timed run. Coming through that unstable section and heading towards the chicane, we've talked about how easy it is to unsettle the car here, and we can see Adam actually keeping it very nice and tidy for himself through sector 2. And now coming across the end of sector 2, he does set a 54.0, so we'll see how this translates to near the end of the lap. And now Adam, through the last final corner of this track, comes across the line. What time will he set? He manages to set himself a 1:15.8. Meanwhile, Jacko now, his teammate, comes across the line, sets a 1:16.9. So nothing competitive from Jacko, it seems like, at the moment. We saw there were two Aston Martins that were currently out on their timed runs. We can see Elite currently ahead of his teammate, will be most likely setting the second lap time of this session. And coming through the final corner, what time will Elite set for himself? Comes across the line with a 1:16.8. Meanwhile, his teammate comes across the line and sets a 1:16.6 and promotes himself up into P2. Still roughly almost 8 tenths behind his teammate. Meanwhile, Pyro in the AlphaTauri manages to set himself a 1:16.6 as well. So we've got P2, P3, and P4 all separated by less than maybe 200ths of a second there. So a very competitive grid at the moment. We can see Mitchell has unfortunately invalidated his lap time, or that, oh, actually, never mind, that is his out lap. So Mitchell now beginning his first timed run. He is your championship leader at the moment, so all eyes will definitely be on him as he begins his first timed run. DRS wide open, heading into turn 1 and keeping it very nice and tidy across the right side. We can see no sparks flying off, so maybe Mitchell running a bit less downforce as compared to the McLaren drivers. Regardless, we'll see what kind of sector times he'll be setting as he comes towards the end of sector 1. He does have a Mercedes in front of him, which has, luckily for him, gotten out of the way and didn't invalidate his lap time, and he has set a purple sector 1 with a 27.1. So at the moment, Adam currently with a 115.8 is taking provisional pole. We can see Joe. Actually, never mind. Joe completely out of nowhere steals provisional pole away from Adam and beats him by roughly 1.5 tenths. Well, will this position stay for long? As we can see, we saw that Joe is extremely quick in the time trial laps, and Mitchell almost going off track there, but manages to keep his lap time valid. Has managed to set a purple sector 2 for himself. And so now Mitchell coming across the final corner of this track. What time will he set for himself? Comes across the line. Mitchell sets a 115.8, so it's not good enough for provisional pole, and it's only good enough to put him in P3 at the moment. As of right now, Joe Royals takes provisional pole with a 115.702, and Big Bambino, his teammate, actually sitting in P2 with a 115.784, so a very impressive lap time from him as well. We can see no other driver currently out on track setting another lap time at the moment, at least not by the looks of it. Yeah, so most drivers now coming back into the pits as that's the end of their first time runs. Meanwhile, we can see Jaguar is out on a run at the moment. So Jaguar currently sitting in P15 without a lap time set for himself. Will definitely be looking to change that. Coming across sector 1 has set a 27.3, not good enough for a purple, or not exactly good enough for a purple sector. But assuming that he can make up enough pace and enough time throughout the rest of the track, he may be looking at a top 5, top 8 positioning here. No purple sector 2 for him either, so it seems like Jaguar is going to be setting a semi-decent lap time at the moment. He is roughly 2-3 tenths off the pace at the moment for provisional pole. But that may be still good enough to get him a very nice banker lap to maybe improve on in his next run as he comes through the final corner on track and sets it for himself a 117.0. Never mind, it was a very atrocious lap from him as he's almost 2.3 seconds off the pace at the moment. So Jaguar is definitely going to be looking to improve on this occasion. We can see that there's another AlphaTauri out on track, and that seems to be Pyro, who will most likely be starting off the second few runs for us. So we're right on board with him as he gets the second runs of qualifying underway. 10 minutes left to go in the session, so it's only a matter of time now before every other driver decides to come out on track. And I love these still shots that we get provided here at Hungary. Just provides for some great camera angles for some amazing overtakes that hopefully we'll be able to witness today. So as it stands right now, with 9 minutes and 45 seconds left to go on this in qualifying, only 4 drivers have managed to enter the the 115s. Will Pyro be able to join that select few? Currently P11 right now with a 116.6, but now has begun his timed run, and with DRS wide open heads down into turn 1 with the Alfa Romeo coming out of the pits right beside him. It's also very great lap from Adam as a banker. Yeah, absolutely. He's managed to set a 115.8, so definitely very impressive. We saw Joe was talking about looking at a 115.4 banker in qualifying, 115.4 qualifying lap time, so we'll see how close he can get to that as Pyro massively climbs onto those outside curves there to get a better run into the corner. But oh, and Pyro, that's what I was talking about through that corner. It's so easy to unsettle the car there, especially if you're a bit too trigger happy. And once again, Pyro looking like he's just drifting through his corners now. It's going to heavily affect his lap time as he's coming through sector 2. Also, it's great to see you as always, Rigo. Yeah, and it doesn't seem like Pyro's going to really be able to do too much. Roughly 1.5 seconds down on his current lap time. So no improvements from him at the moment. We can see Adam is on a flying lap of his own, but he seems to be 5 tenths down on his time. So a lot of drivers struggling on their second runs by the looks of it. And Adam actually choosing to abandon his lap and chooses to go right back into the pit. So that's going to be the end of his run. Meanwhile, we take a look at Jacko, who's currently in P13 with a 116.9. Would be desperately looking to catch up to his team, and is actually currently out on an outlap right now. So he'll be beginning his time runs very, very shortly. Meanwhile, Ishtar trying to keep up with his teammate, who's obviously been extremely dominant through the start of the season. Currently in P7 with a 116.1, so not too far off the pace, but he definitely has some room for improvement, that's for sure. And he may just be able to find that missing last few tenths on this lap. So right now, coming through sector 1, what time does he set? Sets a 28.6, still massively off the pace right now. He actually may have just set a lap time and maybe just going for a really slow lap by the looks of it. Maybe just be coming in, might just be an in lap for him. And Jacko's been disqualified from the session for going the wrong way. We saw a yellow flag for him, and that's going to be the end of his race as Pyro pulls off the road to give space to some of the cars who are making their runs. Oh, and Joe Royal, just as I switch onto him, spins his car around and drives straight into the wall there. Has massive front wing damage. Luckily for him, he didn't retire, and he'll get another chance to go back into the pits and fix his car up. But that's definitely going to hit the provisional pole sitter at the moment. Just want to make sure. It seems like Big Bambino is on an out lap at the moment. So he is currently sitting in P2, roughly 800ths of a second behind provisional pole. So how will Bambino progress through this session? Let's ride on board with him and see as he approaches the end of sector 1 and is currently roughly a 100th up on his time. He's definitely going to be needing a bit more than that, but it just goes to show you how close these drivers are. Ooh, as he may have ridden on top of those curves a lot more than he would have liked. That may have compromised his lap time very slightly. Only 6 minutes left to go in the session. But he does manage to set a purple sector 2 for himself. So Bambino definitely on a very hot lap. We can see BR4 managing to set a 115.8 and pushing himself up into P4. But Bambino, roughly 1/10 up on his current time, comes across the line. Will he take provisional pole away from Joe Royal? Yes, he will. Manages to set a 115.6 and takes provisional pole away from his teammate. How will the rest of the grid respond to this? Seems unfortunate as Ishtar has retired from the session, and that's going to be the end of Mitchell's teammate's run. You can see Ultimate Beast also in the pit right now, currently P10 with a 116.6. So not many changes through that to the second runs. We can see both the Mercedes drivers currently side by side with each other. Ella is currently out on his out lap. He is sitting in P7, just barely missing out on the 115, so he'll definitely be looking to join that small club. So let's ride on board with Ella as he begins, I want to say, his second or third run for the qualifying. Is roughly 4/10 off of provisional pole, so not a whole lot of time needed to be gained to take that position away. But with a track like Hungary and how difficult it is to get those extra few tenths, we'll see how Ella progresses through the session as he comes across the long left-hander followed by the extremely fast right-hander, completely taken flat out. And approaches the end of sector 1. Let's see how up on his time he is. It seems like he's currently a 10th up at the moment. So assuming that he can keep up the pace. No, it's unfortunate. It seems like Ella's invalidated his lap time. And that's going to be the end of his run. So he's got to desperately make it back towards the pits if he's looking to switch onto a new compound of tires and maybe make another run. Joe Royal, on the other hand, who did have provisional pole, is now out on his out lap. What about Jaguar? It seems like Jaguar has just started his run as well. Do have a yellow flag in sector 1. It seemed to be the Mercedes of Ella, or Estelle, apologies. And with 3 minutes and 30 seconds left to go in the session, it won't be long now before every other driver starts heading out of their pits. And it seems like Jaguar's unfortunately 2/10 down on his fastest lap time, so the struggles for the Haas continue through the session. Boom, currently sitting in P14. Hasn't set a lap time himself. Right then, Joe Royal currently sitting in P2, only a tenth behind his teammate. Will be definitely looking to catch up right now. Only 2 minutes and 50 seconds left to go in the session, and it doesn't look like many other drivers have come out as yet. There's an Aston Martin that has gone off track over there to make some room for the Williams driver. Luckily for us, not getting into the way of and not invalidating his lap time as he comes towards the end of Sector 1, and Joe Royal roughly a tenth up on his time. So he's already, assuming that he goes at the pace that he is, he's already most likely got Bambino beat. And obviously you've got the rest of the track to go, so as long as Joe does not mess up his lap, he should be fine. That was a very clean sector, but unfortunately for him, he's also invalidated his lap time. And that's going to be the end of Joe's run unless he can make it back to the start-finish line and has enough life in his tires to improve. It seems like Bambino may be set on taking the position up ahead of his teammate, who unfortunately is now very, very slowly crawling towards the start-finish line. Bambino, meanwhile, is out with his outlap. We can see Mitchell, who is their championship leader, also out with his outlap. Stell, on the other hand, seems to be on a flyer of his own. Currently P6 with a 1:15.9. Luckily for him, he didn't invalidate through that section where we've seen a lot of the drivers been struggling lately. And now Stell coming through the final corner of this track. What time will Stell be able to set for himself? As he comes across the line, Stell manages to set for himself a 1:15.7. It isn't good enough for provisional pole, but it's good enough for P3 at the moment. But it'd be interesting to see how the other drivers respond, as most of them are now coming close to the start-finish line to begin their final runs. Let's take a look at Bambino at the moment, who I know is currently going towards the start-finish line to begin his time run. And Joe Royal looks like he's abandoned his lap time, so that's going to be the end of his run most likely, unless he can make it back to the start-finish line. Actually, he should be able to make it back there pretty easily. Oh, and as I say that, Joe's unfortunately spun the car around. So at first it was him driving into the wall there by losing his car, and now it's him spinning out. Luckily, no wing damage for him. But with 30 seconds left to go, he's going to have to pick up the pace if he wants to make it towards the line to begin his final run. Oh, and still actually goes off track, maybe abandoning his lap as well. So a lot of the drivers struggling, it seems. And that's Adam stopping his car, trying to make way for some of the drivers behind him. And that driver obviously being Bambino, who is on a flyer of his own, and with that, qualifying time has elapsed. So what will Bambino set for himself? He is roughly a tenth up on his time, and as he comes towards the end of Sector 2, it's only, we'll see how much further up he is as he finishes with Sector 2 and is currently 0.06 of a second up on his time. Joe Royal back into the pit, Stell back into the pit, so they won't be improving and won't be taking provisional pole away from Bambino. But as Bambino comes through, and Joe is unfortunately retired from the session, but as Bambino coming through the final corner on track, comes across the line, what time will he set for himself? Bambino manages to set a 1:15.4, roughly 1.13 seconds faster than his previous lap time. But who else will be able to say something about that? We can see BR4 roughly 0.3 up on his time. Comes across the line, manages to set for himself a 1:15.6. It's not good enough for provisional pole. Meanwhile, Mitchell, unfortunately going very, very slowly, and it does not look like he's going to be improving on this occasion. Will be most likely starting P6. Elite, on the other hand, seems to be on a flyer of his own, but actually has abandoned his lap. So by the looks of it, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't look like anyone's going to be taking provisional pole away from Bambino. So a big congratulations to the Williams drivers for securing pole position at Hungary with a 1:15.4. BR4 sits in P2 with the Red Bull with a 1:15.6, and Joe Royal, Bambino's teammate, sits in P3 with a 1:15.7. So how will this shape up the next race, this coming race? So your championship leader starts in P6, and Bambino, who is definitely a contender to win this championship, starts in P1. BR4, who's shown a consistency from the start of the season, is currently in P2, and Joe Royal, Bambino's teammate, currently sitting in P3, Stell in P4, and Adam in P5. Once again, by the looks of it, it seems like we have some light clouds in the area, so there may be some rain expected later on in the session. That's going to throw a spanner into the works, and we'll see how drivers will respond accordingly to that situation. And as the mechanics of the garages T-pose in front of their in front of their respective teams, we're all set to get the Hungarian Grand Prix underway. No rain, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't think we've had rain in Tier 1 yet. It would have been nice to see. Though I'm sure the drivers would say otherwise. Speaking of, that's some interesting information you got there, Rigo. I want to know who you're engineering for. But we're right on board with Bambino as he leads us through the formation lap. And this gives us a chance to take a look at what kind of tires everyone is using. So at the moment, Bambino starts off this race with the medium tires. We can see BR4 and Joe Royal. BR4 and Joe Royal currently P2 and P3 on the hards. Stell and Adam on the mediums. Mitchell on the hards. Elite on the mediums. Ella on the hards. And we can see Ishtard being the only driver on the grid who's opted to put on the soft tire compound. So I'm not too sure what the decision one went into there. Oh, T1 chat? Oh, fair enough. Pyro, on the other hand, also on the hard. So it's a bit of a mixed choice between the drivers. They're not too sure which one's the best tire compound to be on at the moment, but with such variety throughout the grid, we should be looking to some interesting strategies going into this race. Bambino pacing himself very, very well as he hasn't really pulled away from the back end of the grid. So he most likely won't be, as BR4 straight up cuts across the track there. Opting not to use the chicane. And we can see over here the predicted pit stop for the medium runners is around lap 16 of 22, and then they'll switch onto the hards. So keeping that in mind as we see BR4 missing every single braking point that he has in front of him. And the driver is weaving left and right, trying to get some temperatures into their tires. As I think we saw a Haas, an Alfa Romeo, drive completely off track there. Yeah, it should be fine. And as the drivers do their final burnouts and head towards their starting positions, we're all set to get the Hungarian Grand Prix underway. No drivers committing 360s this time around, unfortunately. That would have been interesting to see. And I want to know who that is all the way at the back. I'm not too sure. It seems it may be Ishtar, who dropped down the grid a bit. But regardless, we're all set to get the Hungarian Grand Prix underway as everyone has lined up and we're all... Yep, it seems to be we're all ready to go here. So there's 1, 2, 3... 4, 5 red lights. It's lights out and away we go here at the Hungarian Grand Prix. We can see Bambino's gotten off to a very, very nice start and is beginning to pull away from BR4 as he immediately covers off the inside line heading into turn 1. BR4 attempting to go around the outside, but unfortunately can't get anything done. And we can see the Mercedes of Stell getting very, very interested on that move. And now we can see Stell and Joe Royal currently going side by side. And Stell manages to promote himself up into P3. Looking down the grid, we can see the McLaren coming into a battle there with both the Aston Martin and Ferrari right behind him. And the Ferrari of Ishtar riding that spoiler off the McLaren, and luckily for us there was no contact between the drivers, but they were very, very close to each other there. Heading into the long heading into the long right-hander where it's so easy for drivers to spin out. Luckily, it doesn't seem like any drivers had any sort of incident through that corner and heading into the chicane. No dive bombs being sent at the moment. So we've had a relatively clean opening of the first lap here at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Looking up the grid, we can see Stell going side by side with Joe Royal at the moment, and around the outside and now the inside line heading into this next corner. There seemed to be a bit of contact there between the drivers, and it may have compromised Stell as Mitchell now sends it around the outside of the Mercedes, and there's contact between the Ferrari and the Mercedes. But luckily for Mitchell, it doesn't seem like it compromised him too much as he promotes himself up into P4. And the battle is definitely on, as we can see in Aston Martin trying to go around the outside of the Mercedes, but unfortunately a bit too far back on this occasion to be making those kind of moves. Looking up the grid, we can see Stell now rapidly gaining on Mitchell. Will he be diving down the inside? It doesn't seem to be the case. Actually, yes, it is. Stell completely dives down the inside of Mitchell. Both drivers now side by side heading through turn 1 as we get reminded of the pit stop strategy. And now Mitchell with the inside line heading into this long left-hander manages to retain the position. And the Mercedes getting out of shape there opened the door slightly to the McLaren, but the McLaren does not manage to make the move there. And now with the switchback, the Mercedes and the Ferrari coming into a battle once again, coming towards the fast left-hander. And the Mercedes backs out on this occasion, but that maybe gives them a better run in heading into the next corner, and it does. But unfortunately, that compromised line now allows the McLaren to go into the inside line heading into the chicane. But luckily for him, the McLaren decides to back off, and Stell manages to retain P5. It seems to be a bit of a battle here going on with the other Ferrari between him and the Aston Martin, as he completely pushed the Aston Martin off track. But both cars are still side by side with each other, and Ishtar manages to retain P7. So no incidents just as yet. We've had relatively clean driving at the start of this race. All drivers are very close together, and we see overtakes left and right through the grid. As we begin lap 3, and DRS now gets enabled. So now, how will this translate in the race? See, Stell has been very close to Mitchell throughout this entire time. Once again, Stell going for round 2, diving down the inside of the Ferrari. No contact on this occasion. But unfortunately, Mitchell with the better pace manages to retain that position. And Stell thought about diving down the inside once again, but couldn't do anything as such. And the McLaren and the Mercedes now going side by side through this fast left-hander. The Mercedes gets pushed off track, and he does manage to make the overtake off track. I mean, we're going to have to see if that gets reported in the steward's office later on. Oh, Estelle actually looks very squarely through that corner there, weaving left and right, trying to catch grip in his tires. But luckily for him, he doesn't spin out and manages to keep his positioning. Well, I say that, but Stell's already dropped down a position from P5. But the battle is far from over, as he's still within DRS range of the car ahead. He does, however, have a flashing red light behind his car, signifying that he has less than 10% ERS, and it's only lap 3 of 35. We can see Bambino's already massively pulled away from BR4, roughly 2.7 seconds separating P1 and P2 at the moment. And as I say that, we can see Elite catching up to the Ferrari of Ishtar. Ishtar obviously having DRS to defend from the car behind him. And these massive DRS trains now once again begin to form. Obviously the problem that comes with DRS trains is just that you can't really catch up to the car in front of you because they also have DRS, so drivers just tend to stick behind each other and just wait for a mistake or the other to really capitalize on the cars in front of them. The closest battle on track at the moment seems to be between Elite and Ishtar, roughly 3/10 separating both drivers. And this DRS train is also extremely massive, going up from P4 all the way down into P11, almost P12. As there is an overtake, it seems like Typos has sent it down the inside and managed to overtake Ultimate Beast and manages to promote himself up into P9. So now Typos has his teammate Elite right in front of him. And assuming Typos can get a good exit out of this corner, and it seems like he has, it doesn't look like he's going to really be getting into a battle with the cars behind him. Meanwhile, Elite sends it down the inside of Ishtar. And both drivers now coming into a battle of their own through turn 1, and there's contact! There's massive contact between both drivers, and it seems like Ishtar has massively spun out there. That may have been because he came back onto the track there, and luckily it doesn't look like Elite's really gotten any sort of damage from that incident. But because of getting involved with that incident, he has come into a battle of his own with the remaining cars, and pushes the McLaren off the track there and into the grass. So in the span of a few corners, Elite has dropped down massively down into P9. Ishtar, unfortunately, now down into P15 on his soft compounded tires, and that's really going to sting him. That probably throws a massive wrench into his strategy, so let's see how he bounces back from this situation. Oh, and as I say that, Typos has now spun out. So the nightmares for the Aston Martin team continue as his teammate Typos has spun his car around and now drops down into P14. And now P15 as he has to make way for Ishtar. And because of these incidents, we can see that there's been a bit of a break in the DRS train as Ultimate Beast is not within the DRS range of the car in front of him. And Adam trying to catch up to Mitchell, but can't do anything just as yet. Mitchell showing off his straight line speed as he always has. He's always managed to defend really, really well, even despite a car behind him having DRS. So Adam definitely has a big challenge on his hands if he's looking to get past Mitchell on this track. Let's look down the grid a little. We can see Elite. Oh, just as I switch on to Elite, we can see the Ultimate Beast actually got a bit squirrely through that corner there, and we can see both him and the Aston Martin going side by side through the chicane, and the McLaren of Jacko was about to get very interested in that battle, but decides to back off of it and waits to get the rewards from maybe an incident involving Elite and Ultimate Beast. Seems like P1 to P3 are all in their own leagues at the moment. Nobody's really bothered by any DRS trains up there, and the main battle is going on here. You know, we can see Adam now getting very close behind Mitchell. Once again, that fresh flashing red light signifying that he's run out of ERS, and now Adam sends it down the inside of Mitchell, and Mitchell around the outside trying to retain P4. Both drivers side by side heading into the long left-hander, and Adam attempting to go around the outside. He's still side by side with the Ferrari, but decides to back out of it on this occasion. It doesn't seem like he's going to be able to make the overtake. Meanwhile, at the back, we can see over here, no driver going side by side with each other as of yet. But that McLaren getting very close to the Alfa Romeo of Ultimate Beast. So mistakes is all what everyone is hoping for. They're just trying to catch the drivers out, trying to force them into errors, trying to force them into making mistakes so that they can capitalize on it. We are on lap 7 of 35, and there hasn't been a track invalidation penalty just as yet. But knowing the curse of the commentator's curse, we can see, oh, actually, who was that? Was that Ultimate Beast? It was Ultimate Beast, who was fighting with Jacko Lacko, is unfortunately spun out there. We weren't spectating him to catch what happened in the incident, but he's dropped down into P15, so he's definitely not going to be happy about whatever took place over there. And now Mitchell once again on the DRS straight. We can see the flashing red light of Mitchell now showing that he's been using a lot of his battery to defend from the McLaren behind him. And now Adam once again sending it down the inside, and they both come into heavy contact with each other. That very much compromises Mitchell, as we saw there. And the McLaren of Adam pulls away, and now that allows the Mercedes of Stell to send it down the outside and manages to make the move stick before the corner even begins. And now Mitchell, in the span of like one small straight, has dropped down into P6. There's massive contact there between him and Adam, and out of that whole exchange, it seems like Mitchell came out worse, and now he's looking to maybe fight this position back with the Mercedes, but decides to stick behind him and not send it down the inside into the chicane. Looking down the grid, we can see Pyro getting very close to behind Jacko Lacko. If you can just fill up those rear wings, those rear view mirrors off the car in front of you, you can definitely force them into an error. And that seems to be the plan for Pyro at the moment. Meanwhile, at the front of the grid, we can see Joe Royal has now finally managed to make it to within a second of the car in front of him. So the Williams are looking for a potential 1-2 here, as now the gap separating Joe Royal and BR4 is 7/10. And with DRS wide open, we'll see how much Joe is able to catch up to BR4. Heading into turn 1, he managed to gain roughly 2/10. And through turn 1, there is that immediate DRS zone as well. So with DRS once again wide open, the straight isn't long enough really to make any sort of lunges or dives, but it has helped Joe massively catch up to BR4. Looking down the grid, and this is what we were talking about, Pyro has actually managed to catch up to Jacko very nicely here. 4/10 separating the drivers. It's hard enough to get some traction on this track to begin with, but then when you have the effect of dirty air with the cars in front of you, it just becomes that much harder. But Pyro really hanging in there, but unfortunately has a battle of his own to deal with as the Mercedes of Ella now dives down the inside. Both drivers didn't look like they really came into contact there, but now Ella around the outside trying to make the move stick on Pyro. Both drivers still side by side with each other, and Pyro manages to defend that position very nicely as he retains P9, but it's not over for him just as yet. With DRS wide open, Ella is definitely going to be looking to get this position right back. So how will Pyro defend from this? He still hasn't caught up to him. Pyro luckily has DRS with the car in front of him and manages to retain the position. So the battle between the Mercedes and the AlphaTauri will most likely continue for another lap. Meanwhile, Stell is actually really catching up to Adam, roughly 3.5 tenths separating the drivers. This is for P4. And Joe is once again dropped out of DRS range from BR4. There have been a few incidents out on track at the moment, but we haven't had a safety car or a virtual safety car as yet. So assuming if that happens here, it'll be interesting to see how the drivers coordinate their strategies then. At the moment, it seems like the only driver who had to pit was Ishtar, who was on the soft tire compound to start the race, but has moved on to the mediums. We can see Ella and Pyro have now had their battle concluded as Ella manages to get past Pyro and promotes himself up into P9. Oh, and Pyro not done just as yet, actually coming into a battle with both the drivers, and both drivers having a massive incident there, and Pyro unfortunately getting sent back into the pits way sooner than he would have liked. Unfortunately for him, that collision has sent him into the pits, and he has retired from the session, and that's going to be the end of Pyro's run. Meanwhile, Taipa's looking around the outside to make a move on Jaguar, maybe thinking for a switchback as he can't get the move done just as yet, and now Taipos trying to get the switch back around, but Jaguar manages to cover off the exit very nicely. But it's not over for him just as yet, as now Taipos tries to send it around the outside of this long left-hander. Both the Haas and the Aston Martin going side by side, still side by side through the fast right-hander, heading towards the fast left-hander now. Who's going to come out on top? It seems like the Haas with the inside line will, as he nearly forces the Aston Martin off track. But that was some great racing from both drivers to avoid spinning each other out, but Taipos manages to stay in P11. That was a very big incident there between Ella and Pyro. Unfortunately, Pyro goes straight into the pits and has to retire there. But we're most likely going to be definitely seeing an incident report about that. Is that Boomo spun out? No, it isn't. Okay. Mitchell, who was in P4 and dropped down a few positions after his incident involving him and Adam, looking to bounce back, but unfortunately he just can't catch up to the Mercedes Estelle at the moment, who has DRS on the car in front of him. So nightmares continue for Mitchell. Oh, we can see Ella actually getting ahead of Jacko completely out of nowhere. Now Ella manages to promote himself up into P7. Pyro must have gotten side pod damage from clattering the wall sideways. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. He must have realized that it was just some irreparable damage, and he ended up just retiring from the session. That sucks though, to get involved into an incident and then being sent straight into the pits because of it. That's extremely unfortunate. Hopefully he's able to bounce back from it in the next race that we have. And lap 12 of 35, we've already had one retiree from the session. It's been constantly back and forth between Joe and BR4, so Joe manages to get within the DRS range of BR4, but also subsequently drops off from it occasionally, so a few inconsistent laps from Joe is basically what's costing him at this point. Either that or BR4 is setting phenomenal laps one after the other. And Ishtar actually picks up a 3-second time penalty for multiple warnings. He is currently in P13, so his race only gets worse from here. We do have a yellow flag in Sector 3. No, that is the ultimate beast, as we now get green flags now. So lap 13 of 35, we're a bit under halfway through this race. So while we have the chance, why not review what we are looking at, what the standings are at the moment. So Bambino currently leads this race, has a 4.2 second gap to P2s, and then P2 being BR4. Joe Royal, on the other hand, catching up to BR4, and now within 6/10 to P2. And with DRS wide open, he may be looking, he's a bit closer on this occasion, but still, once again, a bit too far out as we get another retiree in this session. That's the Ultimate Beast, who has also retired from the session. Unfortunately, his car is going to be coming out on track, which I'm sure nobody wants to see, and I'm hopeful that it doesn't cause any other incidents going forward. We can see Adam now getting into a battle of his own as the Mercedes and the Ferrari of Stella and Mitchell respectively try to get back that P4 positioning. The yellow flags continue as Ultimate Beast's AI controlled car strolls through the circuit. So Adam is definitely in trouble here. He has two cars behind him, both of which have DRS. And Adam himself has no DRS to use to defend from the cars behind. Oh, thank God. The Alfa Romeo of Ultimate Beast has despawned. So now then, how will Adam defend from this? We see the red flashing light of the McLaren in front of him. And actually the red flashing light of the Mercedes as well. So both P4 and P5 respectively struggling in terms of saving their batteries. I'm not too sure what the situation is with Mitchell, as we haven't really gotten the chance to see, as we can see the sparks flying off from under the Mercedes. It's just showing how much more downforce it has than the cars around it. But obviously with high downforce you do compromise on your top speed, so we can see that he does manage to catch up through the corners, but unfortunately loses out on time when it comes to being up towards the front of the grid. We can see Buma coming out of the pits on the soft tire compound with roughly 20 laps left to go. It seems we've reached a bit of a standstill here, so it's things have relatively mellowed themselves out through this Grand Prix, which we had a very chaotic start to the race, so I guess it's a nice chance to get a breather. And Mitchell getting very close behind Stell there, as Stell finally heads into the pits on lap 16 of 35 with his 14 lap old mediums. And Mitchell on his hards continuing the run. We can see Bambino who also headed into the pits and switches onto the hard tire compound. That promotes Mitchell up into P4 and Adam up into P3. BR4 in P1 and Joe Royal in P2. Adam being the only driver in the top 5 who hasn't come into the pits, the only driver on the top 5 who's still on the medium tires, or is on the medium tires, rather than still. We can see Jacko Lacko and Typos currently in P7 and P8 respectively have not decided to come into the pits either. So Bambino looking for a massive undercut here. But these two drivers who are on their hards won't be looking to come into the pits anytime soon. Roughly 6/10 separating both the drivers. And I wouldn't be surprised if Adam comes into the pits at the end of this lap as well. He'll have to make a move either sooner or later, and better sooner than later. And as I say that, yep, Adam now comes into the pits and decides to switch off of his medium tires. We can see Adam actually switched onto the medium tire compounds. Interesting, okay. As Joe Royal unfortunately picks up a 3-second time penalty. He is in P2 at the moment, so this will heavily affect him. Luckily for him at the moment, Mitchell is 5.7 seconds behind him, but after pit stops, we'll have to see what the time gap between Joe Royal and the cars behind him are. So he definitely will not be happy about this penalty. And at the moment, Jacko Lacko on 16 lap old mediums has still not decided to come into the pits. He really shouldn't be pushing this so far out. I mean, I can imagine that, I can understand if he's waiting for a safety car or anything, but it's lap 17 of 35. We haven't had one yet. I think it may be about time to just abandon that strategy and just go straight into the pits at this point. Nobody really close to each other. We can see Ishtar roughly 6/10 behind Elite. Ishtar being on his 8 lap old mediums and Elite on his 6 lap old hards. And now Jacko Lacko finally comes into the pits. So Ishtar's tires can definitely go for another 8, I want to say 7, 8 more laps. It seems like Ella has actually left the session. I'm not too sure what happened there. He is currently in P4, so he must have had some sort of disconnection. And that's going to very heavily affect him, as Bambino on his 2 lap old hards is most likely going to be able to get right past him unless Ella can join back immediately. But by the looks of it, doesn't seem to be happening here. Yep, and as I say that, Bambino manages to get past Ella. And that's going to be the end of, and Ella's going to drop down into P5, so he needs to join back as soon as possible. He's definitely not going to be happy with his internet. And Joe Royal once again catching up to BR4. Still hasn't been able to make any sort of moves as of yet. And with that 3-second time penalty, you really would want to get past the car in front of you as soon as possible so you can create that bit of an advantage, so you don't lose out of position by the time the race ends. Still too far back to make any sort of moves, as Adam sets the fastest lap time of the race with a 1:18.4. Still now roughly 1:10 separating him and Jaguar, as still sends it down the inside and manages to make the move stick before the corner even begins. Will Jaguar be looking for a switchback? He did think about it, but still manages to cover off the exit very nicely. And now once again, still brilliant defending from the Mercedes, as he prevents Jaguar from sending it around the outside and making a potential overtake over there. And we can see Booma and Jacko now coming into a battle of their own. Booma with his 4 lap old medians trying to come into a battle with Jacko. It seems like there's a bit of contact between the drivers there. Luckily, no major incidents, as Jacko manages to take P11. But will Booma send it down the inside heading into this next corner? Decides to back out of it on this occasion. realizing that it's just not worth getting into a potential incident on this occasion. And Joe Royal now, with on his 18 lap old hards, becomes the first of the hard runners to come in for a legitimate pit stop. And how will this trigger the rest of the drivers? What kind of domino effect will this cause? Mitchell gets promoted up into P2 after the Williams in front of him comes into the pits. We can see Bambino, who switched off of his mediums a while back and now is on his 4-lap old hards, gets promoted back up into P3. Doesn't seem like any other drivers coming into the pit, so maybe Joe deciding to go for a massive undercut here as he switches on to his medium tires. You can see Adam getting very close behind Joe. Joe obviously will have those very cold medium tires, so he's going to have to be extremely careful on the gas as to not lose his rear end. And we can see Joe struggling for grip there as he goes a bit off track. Hopefully he managed to avoid a track invalidation for that. And now it seems like his tires have gotten a bit heated up and back up to speed as he manages to retain P5 ahead of Adam. Looking down the grid, Ishtar on the other hand, 6/10 separating him and Elite. So that's a battle to keep an eye on. Adam does have those 3-lap older mediums though. But assuming, oh, actually it's both BR4 and Mitchell have both decided to come into the pits and switch on to the medium tires. Unfortunately for them, it's not going to be good enough as Joe does manage to get past both the drivers and takes back P3. And now only has the AI of Ella in front of him, and with that now, it's now a Williams 1-2 with Bambino leading this race on his 5-lap old hards, and Joe currently sitting in P2 with his 1-lap old mediums. We can see Ella still hasn't decided. Oh, Ella, of course, with his AI, unfortunately can't do anything as of yet. Is on his 20-lap old hards. But someone who isn't an AI and still hasn't decided to come into the pits as yet, Jaguar in P8 on his 20-lap old hards. Very surprising they haven't decided to come into the pits as yet. I complimented the nice camera angles we get at Hungary once. And that was when we had like a still shot through the chicane, and now that's all they give us. BR4 shouldn't have much of a challenge getting past the AI fella in front of him. And will manage to hopefully promote himself up into P4. And yes, he does. Barging right through that Mercedes. And even after the pit stops, it doesn't seem like Mitchell's nightmares have really ended as yet, as he stays in P6, as Joe Royal now sets the fastest lap time of the race with a 1:18.1. It looked like Elite had the Haas in front of him, but it seems like the Haas of Jaguar has now finally decided to come into the pits after 21 laps on those hard tires. And Ishtar still can't get past the Aston Martin. You can see Mitchell now getting very close to Ella, who still, unfortunately, still hasn't joined back in the session. And with that, Mitchell now promotes himself up into P5. He is 3.7 seconds behind BR4, who unfortunately does have DRS of the car in front of him. So he'll definitely be pulling away from the Ferrari. So it's definitely an uphill battle for the Ferrari team from here on out. And we see Ishtar on his 14-lap old mediums has now decided to come into the pits, obviously having to make that earlier stop. And now switching on to, it seems to be another set of medium tires. Looks like he's most likely going to be coming out in P11 unless he gets overtaken by Jaguar. See how close this is, and we can see their Ferrari coming out on the right side, and now Jaguar and the Ferrari coming side by side with each other through turn one. Obviously, we got to remember that the Ferrari of Ishtar does have those colder tires, and he can't do anything to defend from Jaguar. But never mind, they're still side by side heading into the next corner. I'm very surprised. Ishtar's tires aren't cold enough, but it doesn't. But it seems like now they're cold. Yeah, they're too cold for him to fight that position back, and Ishtar unfortunately has to give up the position and drop down into P12. Looking up the grid, we can see BR4 within 4/10 of a second to Adam. Adam currently in P3 and BR4 in P4. Coming through the final corner with DRS wide open, heading towards turn one. How is Adam going to defend from this position? This is for the final podium position. We can see BR4 heading towards the inside line, manages to make the overtake stick before the corner even begins. Maybe Adam going for a possible switchback. Yes, he is. As both the McLaren and the Red Bull we're about to go side by side heading into the next corner, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be much of a battle between the drivers as BR4 manages to take P3 and Adam unfortunately demotes himself into P4. Invite Ella? Sure. I don't even know if I have Ella added. Oh yeah, I do. Okay. Alright. That's unfortunate he didn't have an invite. Well, I sent him one. Hopefully he can join back. He is currently still in P6, so there's still a lot to play for. Unfortunately, he does have 23 old lap hards as Mitchell now picks up a 3-second time penalty for multiple track invalidations. Why has Ella's AI not gone into the pits? This is actually criminal. And it chooses to stay out once again. That's inhumane. As we can see, Typos getting very close to Jacko Lacko. Both drivers currently sitting P9 and P10 respectively. And Typos will be definitely looking to gain that extra point with DRS wide open now, catching up to the rear spoiler of the McLaren. It seems like Jacko's draining a bit of battery to defend from this possible overtaking. We can see Typos diving down the inside very last second and managing to go side by side with the McLaren. Both drivers still side by side heading towards the long left-hander. Who's going to come out on top? Typos is once again going to have to send it around the outside of the McLaren. But they're going side by side, and now with the inside line heading into the next corner, Typos still can't defend from this position and unfortunately picks up a 3-second time penalty. But once again, they still haven't gotten off each other's back. And with that inside line, it seems like Jacko's able to retain that position and manages to keep P9. Unfortunately, Typos managed to pick up a time penalty there, but that was fantastic racing from both drivers. As we can see, Stell now getting very close towards Ella. So both the Mercedes drivers now... Oh, once again, Ella is unfortunately disconnected, so Stell will most likely be getting past his teammate as soon as possible. He does have those much fresher lap tires than him, so shouldn't really be much of a question either. Yep, and with that, still can't get past him though, but heading into the braking zone, Stell manages to get past his teammate and promotes himself up into P6. And other than Ella's Ghost, it doesn't look like anybody else is within DRS range of each other. So now, as Ella finally joins back in the session and unfortunately has all the more to deal with his 25 lap old hards, I think the priority is definitely to get back into the pits as soon as possible. BR4 now managing to pull away from Adam. Roughly 1.1 seconds is the gap separating the drivers. Let's take a look at penalties while we have the chance as well. So no driver has actually picked up massive amounts of penalties. We can see Joe Royal with 3 seconds, Mitchell with 3, Ella with 3, Typos and Ishtar with 3 as well. Did Ella manage to take control of his car? Yes, he is. He's going to have to crawl towards the pits to make sure he doesn't spin out. Yep, and there we go. Ella finally into the pits. Criminal how his AI didn't go into the pits any sooner. I'm surprised we didn't see a puncture with those old hards. You have a yellow flag in sector 3. It does seem to be Ishtar who struggled there. And a driver we really haven't had a chance to talk about throughout this entire race is Big Bambino. He's been absolutely on fire since the start of this race, managing to take pole position and is still currently in P1, roughly 2.2 seconds separating him from P2, and P2 being Joe Royal, his own teammate. So credit where credit is due. The Williams team have looked absolutely dominant this weekend. Meanwhile, Jaguar now getting very close behind Ella. Ella has switched onto the soft tire compounds, realizing that there's no point going on to the mediums now. And Jaguar with those 5-lap old mediums, it doesn't look like he's going to be able to make the move as Ishtar unfortunately picks up another 3-second time penalty. And Adam actually coming into the pits. What is this all about? Adam with his 10-lap old mediums decides to not risk it, that they're not going to go towards the end. Has decided to come into the pits and now is switching onto what I can only assume to be the soft tire compound. Yes, it is. And that promotes Mitchell up into P4. Adam now dropping consecutively down. But it looks like he's only going to lose out on 2 positions as he comes out in P6. Still gets promoted up into P5. MMS? Really? So Adam was on mediums and he switched to mediums again? Really? I don't think I realized that. Huh. Guess that would make sense. The closest battle on track at the moment is between Typos and Jacko. He's roughly 6/10 behind him, so probably these active suspensions. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, the start of the race was very interesting. We've had quite a few boring laps now. No driver really coming into a contest with each other, no massive overtakes or anything interesting going on at the moment. We can see Joe is actually kind of catching up to Bambino for a split second there. But the gap's gone back down to 2.4 seconds, unfortunately. And with DRS wide open, Typo's now catching up to Jacko Lacko in front of him, who unfortunately doesn't have any DRS. But it's not good enough on this occasion. He does catch up to him, but can't make any sort of moves as of yet. Though with DRS wide open again, we know how short this straight is. And it doesn't help out Typos even in the slightest bit as Jacko manages to keep P8. Adam will at least overtake Stell, but that was a missed P4 from him. Yeah, absolutely. I think he'll definitely get past Stell. I'd be very surprised if he didn't. He is on the soft tire compounds, and we can see that gap between both the drivers coming down massively. But I think actually, you know what? I don't think P4 is out of the question exactly. Actually, no, never mind. It is. I just realized Stell's gap to Mitchell is 12 seconds, and with 5 laps to go, Mitchell's gonna have to have a massive mistake there if Adam has any chance to get back P4 at the moment. Meanwhile, BR4 has an opportunity to get P2 at the moment. Joe does have his 3-second time penalty. But BR4 is gonna need to keep up the pace or definitely increase it because he is bordering that 3-second gap. Let's look down the grid as Typos gets very close behind the McLaren of Jacko once again, but can't make any overtakes just as yet. Come on, Typos, give us something to watch. You know, as I was saying that, I just realized right now, Joe Royal has managed to catch up to within DRS range of Bambino. So Bambino might be just trying to egg his teammate on just a little bit so he can get out of that 3 second gap from to BR4, and it seems to be working. The gap to BR4 for a split second was 2.7 seconds, and it goes back up to that time. Oh, you think BR4 will win? Wow, bold prediction as he sits in P3 at the moment. But it seems like Bambino is trying to get his teammate within DRS range so he can pull his teammate alongside him, preventing BR4 from getting in that 3 second gap. So great teamwork on display here between the Williams drivers as they're trying to keep each other moving forward. But see how BR4 will respond to this. He'll most likely start draining all his battery, assuming that he has some left. Meanwhile, Adam now trying to catch up to Stell. We talked about this overtake earlier. Oh, and as I say that, Adam unfortunately loses his control of his car and goes off into the grass. And now he's dropped down massively to Stell. As we can see the side effect, the fucking the effects of driving onto the grass coming. You know what? Never mind. Forget it. I've lost my train of thought. Regardless, Adam 1.6 seconds now behind Stell. Looking up the grid, we can see Joe getting tugged along with that DRS, and BR4 dropping down massively. Actually, BR4 actually isn't losing out on too much time. He's actually gained on Joe Royal in at least the last few sectors, so it should be interesting. You think there's going to be a collision between everybody? I don't know. I don't think I can't imagine a collision between both these drivers at this point in the race. 3 laps left to go. It would be very unsensible if both these drivers were to come into a battle with each other and not just respect the positioning as it is right now. We see Adam actually coming into a battle with Stell once again. So we saw at this exact corner last time, Adam unfortunately lost control of his car and paid the consequences for it. But now catching up to the Mercedes Estelle, he can't make the overtake just as yet. Will most likely have to stick behind him until he gets towards the DRS zone. And with 2 laps left to go, there's only so much these drivers can do now. We see Adam not giving up any sort of positioning to the Mercedes. He's definitely very close on this occasion as they come through the DRS zone. And with DRS wide open, I don't think there's much Stell can do to defend from this. We can see the red flashing light of Adam is costing him dearly, as he maybe thought about diving down the inside but thinks better of it. So that battery of Stell helping him stay alive at the moment. And despite having those fresher tires, it'll only help him through the corners on the straights. It seems like Stell still has the advantage. But those red flashing lights of Stell now going to definitely affect him as they come towards the fast left-hander. And Adam still sticking right behind the Mercedes. See Joe Royal and Bambino now getting very close together. So Joe Royal may actually just be looking to fight with his teammate. So you may just be right, Rigo. There might just be a collision between these drivers, and that could just promote BR4 up into P1. We see BR4 now within 2 seconds of Joe Royal, and that's definitely going to cost him. With DRS wide open, will Joe Royal make the overtake on his teammate? Yes, it will. Both the Williams now going side by side with each other. No team orders between each other here today. And Bambino not done with his overtake just as yet, trying to get that move right back done on his teammate, but can't do anything just as yet. Decides to back off and let Joe Royal go through. And now Joe Royal sits at the front of the grid in P1. But obviously, will this positioning stay? There is a 3-second penalty on Joe Royal's name as Bambino goes massively off the track there. Luckily, he didn't pick up a penalty himself. And Adam's still unable to get past Stell. It seems like Joe is actually just pulling away from Bambino. So we saw how easily he got past him, and now Bambino roughly a second behind Joe. And now Bambino has BR4 behind him to worry about with only 2 laps left to go. Yeah, and Bambino with DRS soon. Yeah, absolutely, man. This is it's really coming down to the final lap of the Hungarian Grand Prix as we begin the final lap of this race. Bambino roughly 9/10 behind Joe. We can see BR4 9/10 behind Bambino. Everything to play for. Joe Royal does have his 3-second time penalty. And who's going to come out on top here? Seems like BR4 may be a bit too far back to really catch up to the drivers in front of them, but if assuming that they make a big mistake, then you never really know. We do have a yellow flag in sector 3. That seems to be the McLaren of Jacko. Well, that's come to a complete standstill, but luckily, actually maybe I'm not too sure who that was. That Adam? It was. Oh, and Joe's completely spun it. I completely missed that. Joe, who was leading this race, has completely spun it around, and that's going to cost him very heavily. We can see Mitchell right behind him now with a roughly 5/10 gap separating both the drivers. Who's going to come out on top? I completely missed that as I was looking at the yellow flag out on track. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like. Oh man, it really did come down to the last few corners of this race. Unbelievable. So not a collision, but definitely a spin. That's going to be the end of Joe Royal's potentially winning this race. But instead, it's going to go to the man who did manage to take pole position here. Bambino comes across the line and wins the Hungarian Grand Prix. BR4 comes in P2. Joe Royal, unfortunately, with his 3-second time penalty, is going to come across the line and finish in P3. But luckily for him, with Mitchell, with his 3-second time penalty, won't be overtaking him as Mitchell finishes in P4. We see Stell now, who's coming towards the line, who doesn't have a penalty himself, will most likely be finishing in P5 unless he makes a big mistake to the final corner, as he's very, very slow through this final corner. Is he completely out of fuel? I think he might have been completely out of fuel there as Stell comes across the line in P5. Meanwhile, Adam comes across the line in P6. Actually, drops down into P7. Elite manages to get past him at the very last second. Manages to take P6. Adam in P7. We see Typos in P8. Ella in P9. And Jaguar most likely going to come across the line and finish in P10. Wow, okay. Huh. So this race was extremely interesting at the start of the race, but then it just got extremely bland near the end, and now all of a sudden on the last lap of the race, everything just spiced up significantly there. We can see Ishtar and Booma both side by side, as both the drivers bumping right into each other, not allowing each other to complete the rest of the lap. And as both drivers seemingly drive through each other and come towards the end of the race, it seems to be Booma who's gonna come who comes across the line and finishes in P12, and Ishtar in P13. They both are out of fuel. Oh. And a big congratulations to Bambino. It was a dominant performance from him from the start of this race to the end, and you can't take away from what he did. It was just good, consistent driving throughout. Unfortunate for Joe, who spun it out on the last lap of the race. But I'm not too sure if he would have really been able to hold on to the lead of it anyways with his 3-second time penalty. But who would have known, really? Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, I do not have time to conduct interviews as I do have to get going very, very soon. But you can join us next week as we head for the Austrian Grand Prix. So a very short circuit there, but a very fast one, a very interesting one with a ton of elevation changes and a lot of overtaking opportunities. But regardless, thank you all so much for joining me for Tier 1 this Thursday. I will see you all next week for even more exciting racing.